Good evening, good evening. Let's go ahead and let's call this meeting to order. Roll call, Aniskevich. Here. Gippin.
Here.
Peoples. Here. Lewis.
Here.
Castle.
Here.
Richards.
Here.
Reed.
Here.
Costa.
Here.
Awesome. Could I receive a motion on the minutes from last meeting?
I make a motion that we hear the minutes from the last meeting.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman. And I communicated this to Katie separately, but I think that it possibly they ought not even to summarize comments that we get from the public, because it's possible that we don't fully catch the drift, and we've got the record, the full record, and so that's why I suggest that we just note who spoke. Perhaps if well, in effect, like Ms. Jackson last week, in effect, if it's a complaint, that be noted, but that otherwise we not attempt to paraphrase what they say. But I'm good with the minutes as they were, so.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gippin. Any further discussion? All right, we'll move into the vote. Aniskevich?
Yes.
To approve the minutes?
Yes.
Gippin?
Yes.
Peoples?
Yes.
Lewis?
Yes.
Castle?
Yes.
Richards? Yes. Reed?
Yes.
Costa?
Yes.
Boyd, yes. Okay. All right, we're in the portion of our agenda, item number 3, where we have public comment. Public comment will be in total of 30 minutes. That'll be 3 minutes per person. We also want to make sure that every public comment that we receive, we would love for our public to fill out the slip that is on the podium for any additional comments or questions that they may have, so that our community engagement subcommittee can follow back up with you within about 48 hours, just to first of all follow up on any complaints that you might have or any discussions or questions you might have of us. So at this time, if there's any public comment, we want to open up the floor for that. Go ahead.
Yes. We'd like to call Mayor-elect Shamus Malik to the podium, please.
Thank you all. I'll be brief, but I wanted to come down. I had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Boyd earlier in the week, and obviously, I feel very strongly about the important work that this board is doing. This is an independent board, so this board is independent of council, this board is independent of the mayor, this board is independent of the police department. But I want you to know that come January, that I will treat this board and its recommendations with the sense of urgency that it deserves. Any kind of support, whether it's administrative support, any kind of support, you have it. And again, we have one mayor at a time, and I respect that process, but I did just want to come down here to show support. If there's any assistance that I can provide in the coming months, I'd be happy to offer that. But most of all, want to thank all of you for your service. I've spoken with many of you individually, but these are very difficult, very painful times for our community. But I truly do believe that we can find our way through it if we tackle this stuff head on. We truly can. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman Malik. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Councilman Malik. Is there anyone else?
Okay, if there's no other public comment, we'll move on with our agenda. We'll go into item number 4, agenda item 4, but I want to do it from a standpoint, Ms. Anastasia, if you can just give us an update on our independent police officer, because we know that he's not here on this evening. So we know that we probably won't be getting a report from him, but if you can update kind of the board on your communication with him.
Yes. I spoke with our police auditor right before I came, and he was actually trying to get himself out so that he could be here, and I told him not to do that. But he is going to be having surgery tomorrow, so it's quite possible he may not even be here next week. So I've told him that he's got his city phone with him if someone calls to complain about something. So I've told him that he can use me, and if someone's that upset or whatever, he can forward their number to me, and I will call them. Also, that's about it. He is having surgery tomorrow. He says that, you know, I don't know how he said the doctors aren't optimistic, but I told him to be optimistic. So that's where we're at with that. So you know, our auditor is down, and of course, you all know we have positions that have yet to be filled. So I have volunteered to fill that gap. If there's a gap that needs to be filled with police complaints, I will fill that gap.
So what we'll look to do in new business is talk about our responsibility as a board, especially with our department that we oversee, and how we're going to help to fill in some of these responsibilities, because what we don't want to happen, the complaints from our community won't stop coming, and they shouldn't stop coming. However, I want us to be diligent on communicating with our police department, but also Mr. Young, to see how we can fill in some of those gaps. I think probably between this board, but also some of our subcommittees, which is one being our community engagement subcommittee, and possibly our governance subcommittee. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in new business, right? Okay. Moving on to agenda item number 5, where we get into our subcommittees report outs. Mr. Gippen, governance is first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governance met yesterday evening, and we did actually have, it was a little bit accidental, but we actually did have a community member participate. We were at the Kenmore Library, and a gentleman named Ricky Allen, he's the president of the Friends of the Library for that branch, was there and came into the room, and we, you know, we talked, and he actually gave us, I don't know, could have been as much as 20 minutes of his time to just really give us his impressions about the board and all that's going on, which was actually very, very helpful, I think. But we did do some business too, and the one order of business for potential action, we approved unanimously a proposed procedure for community subcommittee member recruitment, consideration, appointment, and removal that was discussed, and we were actually charged last week to try to get that done, and we did get it done. So I circulated that this morning to the board members. Mr. Chairman, I wonder if it's appropriate. I've got hard copies of the draft that we worked from yesterday. It is the same. It was not changed. Would it be appropriate to make that available to the members of the public that are here?
Absolutely. Mr. Gibbon, I'll pass it out. That way you can keep going on with your report.
Okay. I've got more if you...
Okay.
Here. Mr. Chairman, as you can see, the understanding that we were operating under in drafting this, based on the vote last week, was that we would have members of the committee who would be formally, formally named and, and designated by the board. So this is a fairly detailed procedure under which we would take applications, review the applications, act on the applications, potentially consider reappointment, and then finally, hopefully it would never be necessary, but how we would consider removal. So for the purpose of discussion, I will move approval of this proposed procedure.
Is there a
Mr.
second?
Are we going to have a chance to discuss it? Okay, I'll second.
All right, let's move into discussion.
So I'd be happy to answer any specific questions about it, and also, as I noted in the email message this morning, there may be some broader issues that members may want to bring up.
Mr. Gippen? Mr. Chair, I have a question for Mr.
Yes.
Gippen. Okay, I had a question about item number 2 and item number 3. Okay, item number 2, recruitment. Do you have an idea of how many people you're looking at recruiting? And are you planning to do any type of background checks on those people?
Well, the answer to how many, no idea. I mean, one of the issues that's left open in this is even how many members of a given subcommittee there would be. That would remain to be determined by this board, either by a resolution or conceivably that's a matter for the rules. But how many? My sense is we would want to let the community know as broadly as possible that this was available, but I don't know. As far as background check, no, that's not specifically set out in this. It's a little more broad. It's set out so that essentially the subcommittee itself, the subcommittee chair, I think here's the phrasing. If you go to paragraph 4, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line, the initial review shall include such receipt of information from the applicant as the chair determines necessary, but must include at least one interview. In other words, it's quite broad, so that if a background check seemed appropriate, there'd be a background check, but otherwise not.
So, okay, if you had like 20 people, I'm just throwing that number out arbitrarily, who wanted to be a part of this subcommittee, I mean, do you think it's prudent to have a cutoff number for community involvement, people to be involved in the subcommittee?
You mean the number of the members of the committee?
Yes.
Do I personally? I guess I haven't come to a view on that, no.
Okay.
I feel like when our subcommittee met yesterday, the discussion tracked more towards us bringing this forward with the caveat that we may consider some alternative approaches and looking to some of the other subcommittee structures that exist already, that bodies that are operating under the city of Akron that are already established. I think that these proposed rules are overly restrictive, and I don't think that they actually provide a meaningful opportunity for people to, I think, engage, or I guess I think we really need to have the discussion of whether or not we really want to create a process like that's overly burdensome and encumbering for us to get folks involved. For instance, the subcommittees that exist under the Racial Equity Task Force for the city are pretty much open to, there's much broader discretion. The restrictions in terms of doing a review, an interview, an application, this, that, and the third are not there. And I'm wondering, just for the sake of discussion, does it make sense for us to have subcommittees that are, in essence, completely just open for anyone to attend and to take part of? I don't know. I want us to think about the additional work that we're creating for ourselves, and also the degree to which we're being exclusive to actually getting support and involvement from folks who would really want to be a part of it. And obviously, all of our subcommittee meetings would be open to the public, so whoever wanted to attend could attend. But I think that's a lot different than telling people, hey, we welcome you to be a part of this subcommittee, and if you're here, then you are in effect part of our subcommittee, and we want you involved with this process during the whole way. So those are just kind of some of my thoughts, and I think for something else for us to think through. But I guess I'm just concerned about us making this process overly restrictive.
Mr. Chair. I completely understand everything that you said, Mr. Costa, and I agree. I think it would be ideal to look at potentially different subcommittees having a different process. And for an example, I think the Community Relations Committee needs to be open to the public to a degree. I think that would be fair. We want to hear from the public. We want to hear from our constituents. I don't know that it would be appropriate for that same process to be applicable to the Budget Committee or to the Governance Committee. I think it may be prudent to consider each subcommittee determining what they want the process to be and the engagement to be. I think it should be left up to the subcommittees to decide.
Just to remind everybody, we do have a motion and a second to accept the procedures of a subcommittee. We can continue in discussion.
Yes, I have one other question. On your item number 3,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, the application process, can you explain that further, how that's going to take place, with in mind that our IPA is not available at right now? I don't know if you were planning for this to start right away, or if you were in a month or 2 months or 3 months, but my question is, how do you plan to go about the process of the application process?
I don't know that I can state it any more specifically than this. I mean, I didn't see any reason why we should try to reinvent a different application form. So we'd use the form we all filled out, adding which subcommittee the applicant is seeking to join, or subcommittees, and yes, that it would go through the auditor. I think that if this, in fact, if we do adopt this procedure, I think we have to assume there's going to be an auditor, and I think that would just fall into one of the other tasks that somehow we're going to have to figure out how to do while we're not staffed up. But I wouldn't want to, in this procedure, I wouldn't want to set out anything other than the applications come through the auditor as our lead staff.
So, go ahead.
Could you expound on why it would go through the auditor instead of the HR committee?
Because the auditor, in effect, is our executive director. And it seems to me that again, assuming we've got a fully functioning staff, you know, that's among the most things I think should be done by the staff. And this to me is just it's an administrative function to receive an application, and then you know, in other words, process it in. I mean, that's where it needs to go. That's our office. But then going on to it, and then next to 4, the application shall be transmitted upon receipt to all board members. I thought it should be all. And then the particular subcommittee chair would do the initial review, and so on and so on. But it seemed to me that, again, assuming we're really staffed as we should be staffed, that those sorts of functions should be done by the staff.
So that was just like the initial point of contact. It goes to the auditor, and then it can be disseminated from there?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, and this is going to come out in the vote. I think that we want to always be mindful of not being exclusive. I think that's important. As we ask people to, as it was said last week, to trust us, I think we have to ask ourselves, man, are we creating barriers towards trust in any type of way, from us to the community, to be a part of these things? And so I just think that's important as we think about it and as we move in this direction. And then too, to Mr. Costa's point, I don't know if we want to give ourselves more work to do, especially being down of our auditor now. We're probably going to be leaning into some deeper waters, if you will. So I think that's something that we have to really pay really close attention to. I think to your point, Ms. Reed, like, is anybody going to be a part of the subcommittee of the Budget and Finance? Probably not. Right. But there are always some who are enough and have enough courage to want to be a part of that. But I said I don't want to limit. Obviously, people that are a part of these they don't have any voting rights necessarily, but it is a platform to be able to hear from the community and to hear any responses that they may have. And so we have an opportunity right now, I think, in this moment, to present ourselves as bridge builders and not ones that's trying to defend a certain dam, but building a bridge of connectivity between us and our community, but also back to our police department. So I just want us to be mindful about, you know, just presenting a lot of procedural things for people who want to, you know, again, volunteer their time to come and sit and talk about things, but also add their voice to some of these things. So I just want us to be mindful of that.
Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate to move to table this?
Yeah, we can table it.
Unless you just don't want to proceed in this direction. I mean, that's really the
Yeah.
point.
I think that I don't believe, and again, I don't speak for all of us, but I think that it comes to a vote. We can choose to table it, we can choose to make a vote. That vote passes, but I think we should choose just to say, hey, whosoever will, let them come and be a part, and I think that's good. Because again, the voting still comes back to us as a board, as you all who chair committees come and bring us information based on your reports.
Well, let me suggest this instead, Mr. Chairman. I'll withdraw my motion. You know, again, there may have been some misunderstanding, but
It was, no, you're right, it was talked about, you're not wrong.
Okay. So this is what it is. So I'll withdraw the motion. This work's done. If we ever come around to where we think, you know what, at least for some, maybe only some subcommittees, not others, but we think that a formal procedure is needed, well, this exists. We can take it up again. Does
Well,
that?
and I'm fine with that, but how does everybody else feel about that on the board?
Go ahead. I agree with tabling it for now, because I just have to, I don't want us to move so fast, you know, that the things that we actually need to be doing to, like you said, build those bridges and deal with citizens' complaints. That's why we are this board, because of citizens' complaints. And maybe it's just the way I'm feeling, or I'm not just understanding. So, but I just feel like we're starting to go in a lot of other different directions here, and we still have yet to have a training with our auditor to see what his complaint process is, how does that move, how does that go, and I feel like we missed the mark, frankly, by having 2 other retreats before we even thought about having a training with them. Because right now, I can't speak for everyone else, I can only speak for myself. I feel like we're in limbo on how that process goes, you know, but yet he's still getting complaints from the public. And that's why we're seated here. And I feel like, for me, first and foremost, we need to get that down. We need to understand what's going on with the complaint process, how to manage it, how to navigate it, especially if our auditor is going to be out of commission for a while, and he very well may be, depending upon, you know, what happens with him tomorrow. He very well may be, and then we're up a creek without a paddle. I think that is the priority right now.
Ms. Richards?
I agree with tabling it for now, but when I was thinking about having more community input about these committees, one of the things that I was thinking was, as like the HR committee, you know, maybe we get to a point where we really think we would love to have an HR attorney, a specialist, so we look at our committees and what we're doing. Maybe the community relations needs a social media guru. Community engagement needs a social media guru, you know, and that we could reach out. So I see it twofold. I see it filling out what we lack and being very intentional about inviting people, and then also having just those who are interested to be able to participate as well. That's all.
Ms. Lewis? Oh, my bad, I'm sorry, I thought I saw you reaching for your mic.
Yeah, I think that the way that we build trust is going to be by providing unfettered access to the extent that we can, and that be to the complaint process, to the our committee process, and in showing that we're making every effort to include the public. And I also think that, like, we're going to miss out on some very cool expertise and folks that are excited to help out with things if we're limiting. And I think that we've seen already that the degree of participation that we see is limited to how active we are in putting the information out there. So what I say that is, we may only have subcommittee folks that are interested in applying based upon people who actively participate in circles to where they would have the knowledge that the subcommittees even exist. But what about somebody off the street who finds out that there's a subcommittee meeting that's going on and they've got some awesome input and ideas and they just want to show up and be a part of the process? I think we should table this at this point, and I think we had a really great discussion yesterday, and I thought we were all on the same page, and I think it's going to be a little bit more work to move it forward, but this is a good starting point, and I'm happy that we're here now and that we're thinking and flushing out the consideration factors. But I think that subcommittees and the way that we structure the subcommittees is one of the best ways that we can get an early win with the community and bring them along in the process.
So if we're tabling this, let's get a motion to table it. And so are we saying that we're not, until we rectify this, are we saying that we're not inviting any people from the community to the subcommittees until this gets handled?
No, I think,
Okay.
I think, I think that's the right way to go, honestly. It was a
Okay.
good discussion yesterday. We felt we should put this before the board
Okay.
in case it wanted it. But no, it would mean only that we're not going to have this formal process.
Okay.
So that some people some people would be formal community subcommittee members, okay? No, it'd be very much the opposite. That we want as much involvement, including on our, HR committee and governance committee. It would just open it up so it's not formal and we're not drawing a line.
I just wanted to be clear before we get a motion to table. So you made a motion, do I got a second? Second. Roll call, Anaskevich.
Yes.
Gibbon.
Yes.
Peebles. Lewis.
Yes.
Castle.
Yes.
Reed.
Yes.
Richards.
Yes.
Costa.
Yes.
Boyd, yes. Awesome.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you. I think that's the outcome we were all kind of maybe looking towards yesterday. So I think it's a good outcome. And we've got this. If we need it, we've got it. The other thing we discussed at some length yesterday, and I want to present to the board tonight and to our public that's here, and this does not have anything to be acted on tonight as such, but we talked a lot about what seems to be the central question that's open concerning this board, which is the extent of its authority. And I think we've probably literally been debating that, since literally day one. The question being, is this a board which would independently investigate citizen complaints in particular, at the same time conceivably as the police is investigating those complaints, and possibly would come to a report and recommendation to the mayor, the council, the chief, before the department side decision had been made? Or is this board only to review the disciplinary decisions that are made pursuant to a citizen complaint after those decisions are made? In effect, what Phil has been doing, all these years. And it seemed to us, and we've had the draft of the rules and been talking about them. It seems like an awful lot flows from a decision by the board as to what it takes to be the extent of our authority, if only because if we have the authority to independently investigate simultaneously, well, that means that the procedures for doing that are probably quite different than if we are just reviewing after the fact, and we're apparently going to talk about that tonight a little bit. So it seemed to us that that is an issue which needs to be decided by this board, and fairly soon, because it guides so much else in what we do. And it seemed like one approach to doing that that I wanted to present to you all tonight and see if this would work for you, is that we, the governance committee, would, in effect, draft 2 resolutions, okay? One resolution would be expressing that we have the fuller authority that's been described. The other resolution would be that we have only the review authority, if you like. And we would have to take some care in drafting that, obviously. But that we would bring these alternative resolutions to the board with no recommendation from the committee as to which resolution ought to be adopted, but that hopefully we come to, that we believe these resolutions fairly state the issues, the 2 approaches, much like ballot language was kind of the way I thought about it. If that makes sense, we'll try to do it. In fact, we might even try to do it by next week, because this is so urgent. But that's what I wanted to, well, we talked about it last night, but that's what I wanted to present. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Gibbon, I think that's a great point. One of the concerns I would have is I think that should be ran through the law department. But I like to hear, I think it should be, the 2 resolutions, I think it would be important to discuss that with the law department before we were to put that forward, out of concerns that there could be some legal implications. Perhaps there aren't, and you would know best, I guess. But I'm just concerned that putting those resolutions forward without a full understanding of what that could mean, or if there could be any legal pushback with that. Secondly, Mr. Chair, if okay with you, Mayor-elect Malik, you were one of the drafters of issue 10. What did you all, as a representative of that committee, what did you all have in mind our scope of power would be?
Sure. So I don't want to speak for everyone, right? And, I provided input to the text, but I was not the sole drafter of any of it. I guess there are 2 things that I would say. I know that my understanding, and again, my understanding of the intent was that there really be 3 buckets of issues that would be covered: civilian complaints, use of force investigations, and then deadly force investigations, right? And I believe the draft rules, or the rules that have been accepted, really relate to one of those 3 buckets, right? And so I do think it's important to be in conversation with the law department and with the group itself about those other 2 buckets. And I discussed that with Mr. Boyd. The second thing, and again, I'm not a member of this board. I don't want to be, I want to make sure that we have that independence. But I do think that, we did take a lot of care to make sure that we acknowledge, I think the intent was for the auditor to proceed as he has proceeded in the past, by being aware and having information on ongoing investigations, but only providing recommendations and feedback on completed recommendations. And that, to that point, that, the board's oversight of that work would then be with the same extent, right? And I also agree that if there is the idea that that would be different or expanded or what have you, it really should be probably in consultation with the law department, and so anyways, that's my comments.
Thank you.
The other point I would make is, I don't want to go too far down this road, to the extent that it would be helpful to have all of the petitioners from issue 10 come in and speak. At next week or at a future meeting, I've spoken with Senator Sykes, I've spoken with Nanette Pitt. I know that, people would be willing to come in. I think we want to be respectful of our role, and that's why folks have engaged in the way they have, so.
Mr. Chairman, and Mrs. Reed, you were questioning, but I wonder if I could ask Mr. Malik a question further.
Ms. Malik, first of all, Councilman, do you feel comfortable answering the question?
I can decide whether I feel comfortable hearing the question.
Mr. Malik, you heard the suggestion. given what your understanding is of what the powers of this board properly would be, is there any need for this board to make a decision about the extent of its authority? In other words, is the suggestion I made about 2 resolutions and making a decision between them, is that a meaningful thing to do or not?
What I would say is that I think that it would be helpful to have advice from the law department in terms of what they believe the ambit of power is, because we do, in my mind, that power, I do not believe that the power of the board butts up against the police union contract, right? But I'm not your lawyer, right? And so I think it would be helpful for the city's lawyer to opine on that. And to be present and involved in discussions. And I think to the extent, I say this as a city council member, to the extent that language in the charter ought to be further defined to provide further clarity about that power, then perhaps that is a subject for council to discuss and deliberate on. Particularly if this board feels that would be appropriate, then that could be communicated to council.
Mr. Chairman, could I comment?
Please.
And I appreciate Councilman Malik's answer. I think I can fairly clearly say that we know the position of the city law department because it was reflected in the first draft rules that we were provided by Mr. Angeloni at our first meeting. And those rules, they were amended, but they haven't been submitted to council. But very clearly, those rules only provide for this board to be carrying out after the post facto review function that was one of 2 options. In other words, essentially overseeing and perhaps assisting what Mr. Young has been doing, but no more. So if indeed we must be guided by the law department's view, I think that's been set. I don't personally, as a lawyer or as a board member, agree with that interpretation, and I could explain why, but I don't think that's helpful. But if we are bound by that determination, I do not think that there's any need for this board to make a decision about it. It will guide the rules. They will be more limited in what we would need to do than if we had an independent investigative function.
So let me go back, Mr. Gippen. While we did amend rules at that very first meeting, we never drafted those rules to turn them into Mr. Angeloni. So he never submitted anything.
Correct.
So nothing never went submitted to him, so therefore he could submit to city council. So we haven't done that as of yet. That's what we're still waiting on. But what I want to hear from the other members of the governance committee, subcommittee, to understand how you all see Mr. Gibbons' proposal. So.
I thought that, when we spoke yesterday, I thought that us getting some clarity with respect to the direction and the position that we're going to take in terms of the authority that we're going to exercise would be helpful, because that would lead us in moving forward and provide some clarity just in terms of, okay, this is going to be the position that we're taking in terms of what we can do, and this is what we're going to do until we're told otherwise. But we also kind of thought that it made sense to then bring forward 2 resolutions to discuss, because then we could flush out the alternatives. And I think it's a matter of us making a determination of what the function of this board is when those decisions may be reaching beyond, I guess, us to make those decisions. Because I think the reality of it is that the decision is going to be influenced based upon what various bodies want us to do. And so I would be a fan of just me personally, I would be a fan of us moving forward with the path of bringing forward a couple of resolutions after we seek a little bit of additional insight, perhaps one from the groups that organized issue 10 and talking specifically to the question of what was the intent, to maybe us circling back with the law department and seeking their thoughts with respect to the path of bringing forth the resolutions and the procedure of how we do that. And in 3, us maybe even considering us retaining independent counsel to get an outside opinion as well too. I think those are 3 things that we could do to greatly improve our decision process as we move going forward. But I mean, if I had to decide absolutely today in terms of what I want to do, I want to adopt a resolution that codifies our ability to have investigations that don't go merely in conjunction after the work that the police has done. Because I think that it's been super clear that we've had people show up and talk about the complaint process that the police has gone through, and it has been apparent that there's instances where there's just not much of resolve, or to where the investigation favors the police department, and it seems fairly biased in the pursuit of it. And so that's kind of how I'm feeling, that's where I'm at, and that's what my thoughts are, and I welcome anybody else's.
Mr. Chair, again, and I agree with Mr. Costa and Ms. Reed, but again, we cannot leave out the 16-year experiences that our auditor has had with this complaint process. I feel like we're trying to put the cart before the horse here. When assuming he's going to get better, and again, tonight he was supposed to do a training for us, we need to know the process that he goes through first with police complaints. And then we can go from there and codify and ratify whatever we want after that. But we need to know, what does he go through? What are the obstacles? I've had extensive conversations with him, and there are a lot of things that we're talking about doing that he told me flat out, frankly, he said, you all could get sued for that individually as members of this board. We need that knowledge that he has from that, as well as following up with the law department, to see if the law department even confirms what he's told me. So I really think before we go off like, cowboys and cowgirls coming up with, resolutions for this on how to deal with complaints, we need information from our auditor.
Mr. Chair, on our meeting, I believe it was March 26th, the auditor did an hour review of what his process was and is, and it seems to me there is a glitch going on. He goes through the process seamlessly, but what is happening is he's not getting the reports in a timely fashion. There's something left out. And so it's not so much that we don't know the process, it's that it's not working seamlessly. And so for him, he's overloaded with his process. And so that's part of the reason why the board has come together to address transparency and accountability. What is happening that a person who registers a complaint and that complaint is not addressed in a timely fashion, and I believe he said once again up to 30 days, and then something happens and this thing happens, and so the complainant is left hanging. And so one of the things that I want to do as a community engagement is make sure that regular citizens know how to register that complaint, and then come back and find out how is it going, because we can get bogged down in the politics of, this thing and that thing, but I think that's the larger issue.
So I want to go back to what's on the floor. Is Mr. Gippen from the governance subcommittee brought up 2, if you will, proposals in the direction of a board that we should go based on the powers or the limitation of those powers that we either have or don't have. Is that correct, Mr. Gibbon?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I do believe that I do believe that the process of how things have been done with investigation is not correct. And I think that we have to investigate that. And I think, to your point, Ms. Lewis, I've heard numerous times from Mr. Young of how many barriers or stumbling blocks that he has. We are here as a board to present ourselves for him as some barrier busters, if you will, so that we can alleviate some of those barriers out of his way. I think that it's going to be hard for us to eliminate some of those barriers out of his way if we just simply couch or posture ourselves as, if you will, as it's been called before, but we have to make it clear that we are an oversight board. We're not a review board. And so that language works two different ways. And so I think that having those two proposals is, in my opinion, is a good way to go, as well as continuing to talk with, as it's been said numerous times, to the law department. And I think those conversations with them happen after or once we, if you will, take those drafted rules, amend the ones that should be amended based on fidelity of the charter that we were given, along with the proposal of how we see ourselves, and say, hey, if we want to run an investigation simultaneously as the police department, I think there's goodness in that, not from a perspective of wanting to, you know, be disrespectful or dishonor, but also bring about some clarity. I think that waiting 30 days for a complaint is a long time, just in my opinion. It's a long time to wait for a complaint. And I think people are deserving of feedback. So the continual discussion, and there probably needs to be a motion on what you're asking,
Okay.
Mr. Gibbon, that happens. And I think you said if that's something that we can have, that's an easy turn. I think that's good. And I don't mind having a conversation with the law department to say, hey, these are two ways that we're looking at this, and here's why we are. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And I want to give respect here, Ms. Anaskevich, that Mr. Young has committed a lot of his time to being our independent auditor, without a doubt. And I think that understanding the process, to your point, is good. What I've heard, though, repeatedly is how damaged and how broken the process is. So there's going to be a perspective of, he's going to speak from, hey, here's my process today, and I think we know what that is, and I think we're all deemed that unsatisfactory. So now it has to become a thing, how do we better the process to make his job easier to do, so that way he feels some goodness based on what he's doing, because he's fielding all these complaints and calls from citizens that may appear to him that he's not doing the things that he's supposed to do. And we're here to help to undergird him. And so if this is an avenue for us being able to do that, I'm all for that.
And I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I still feel that, and believe me, nobody hates more than me, that probably him too, that he can't be here to give us some kind of training, these trainings. I still think, you know, for example, what Ms. Lewis just said, that she had an hour-long meeting. Well, I don't know what transpired in that meeting with Phil. I just think that we all need to.
No, hold on a second. What transpired is what she just said transpired.
Right, but I'm saying if we, I don't know what was said. So, I mean, other than what she just said.
Beg your pardon.
So, let me finish, please.
Sure.
Let me finish, please.
Hold on.
I'm speaking, I got the floor. So, all I'm saying is, I don't disagree with anything that's being said here. I think what Mr. Gibbon proposed is fantastic, but I still think to jump over the auditor's head, who has 16 years of experience with these complaints, I think it's just prudent for us to give him a chance to give us as a group a couple trainings so that we start, we start by what he says he goes through, and then we go from there.
Go ahead, Ms. Lewis.
So, let me be clear, Mr. Chair and committee. What I was saying is, in our first initial meeting, the auditor gave us an hour overview of the process. I didn't have a personal meeting with him, but we all can remember that he came. And then when we had the meeting or the training with the police department, he again, along with Officer Brett, or is that his name?
Is it Beck?
Yeah, Beck. He explained his piece. So I'm not saying that it wouldn't benefit if we had additional information from the auditor, but what I am saying is that, as you said, Mr. Chair, the process is broken, and so I am not negating his efficiency and his proficiency. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying that we heard from him and he shared with us on more than one occasion what the process was. And I think he's frustrated with the fact that the process is not working. So I did not have a personal meeting with him. He gave us an hour overview, and then he answered questions in the police training session.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, I apologize.
Ms. Adams, Ms. Reed, go ahead.
I just want to say, I don't think that either has to be mutually exclusive. I think they can all occur simultaneously. I think it is absolutely prudent. I think we're all on the same page that it is imperative that we can get a formal training from our current auditor, Mr. Phil Young. But I also think we are more than aware that the process is broken. And the resolutions would benefit us all to be able to maybe figure out some of the gaps if we are able to perform independent investigations. And I think they can all happen simultaneously, but I think with respect to Mr. Young's experience, it's important. I think we're all on the same page that we can hear from him. And again, I think we're going to all hear, again, the various stages and levels of a broken process. And we need to know that in and out. But on the same page, I do think we need to do our best to expand our scope of power within the realm that we can, that fits inside of our charter.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms.
And I also think it's really important as we're having this conversation, just to be cognizant of these barriers that we are addressing that Mr. Young has presented numerous times. These aren't new barriers. If you go back and you look at early interviews with Mr. Young when he was brought on and going through this process, or looking at when he presented to city council subcommittees, these barriers he's discussing, they've been year-long barriers for years going back. So I think it's important that we understand that these aren't brand new barriers, that these have been long withstanding systemic issues with the process. So I think that's just important to take into consideration as well.
Mr. Giffen, thank you for bringing this up. If, as the chair of the governance committee, if you don't mind kind of presenting or drafting those two policies as you had, or proposals.
I will be happy to do it. It's just drafting.
Okay.
I mean,
Thank you.
It probably, I won't say fun, but I think the committee and any others who want to come to the meeting, I'll announce the time and place at the end here, join in. Happy to do it. And definitely we'll run them by the law department. I'm only cautioning that I think it's fairly clear what the law department's advice will be. We know it already. And what we do with that is a different issue. I say as a lawyer, we are the client, and the client decides. So I'm happy to do that work with my committee members, and hopefully we can get something back by next week, and I'll try to work hard on it so we can get it to the law department, as soon as possible after we do the drafting, and bring it and see where we go. But I think there's a lot of issues here. For what it's worth, I think that what Mr. Young does is going to inform either approach. So that just is a given. It doesn't, going one way or the other doesn't change the need to know fully what he does and build on what he does. But there are two very different courses of action here, and you know, and in the end, we perhaps initially need to decide what we think our powers are and should be, and if there are others who countermand that, then they do. But yeah, we'll proceed. We'll proceed.
And anything else do you have for your committee?
Only the next meeting, I think.
Okay.
There wasn't anything else we talked about yesterday? No. Yeah, we're going to continue to meet at library branches. I had already booked Ellett for next week at 6 o'clock. And our thinking was maybe go somewhere else, but I tried to get both Maple Valley and North Hill in the course of the day today, and their rooms weren't available. So at that point, I stopped, and if you don't mind, we'll go back to Plan A. So it'll be the Ellett Branch Library at 6 o'clock next Tuesday.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gibbon, for your report. Yes, quickly, Ms. Anderson.
I just have a question. Mr. Gibbon, do you feel like it's not important for you to engage with our auditor first before you even start? I have no problem with the two resolutions.
Ma'am, with respect, I do not feel the need to do that. Like I said, I think that what Mr. Young does informs either choice. I think, I think we probably spent 4 hours. I mean, I went over there, in that time period before we finally met. And I have read I've read a lot of the source material. I think I have a very good understanding of how Mr. Young proceeds and, the basis of some of the obstacles. But the decision about the extent of our powers, I do not think depends on a knowledge of what Mr. Young is doing. Nor with respect to him, we know what his view is. I'm sorry it got into that last week. I snapped fast, but he also talked fast. We know what his view is, that if we were to attempt to exert the fuller authority, the independent investigative authority, his view is that would contravene the collective bargaining agreement, which under the charter, if it would contravene the agreement prevails. For what it's worth, my view as a lawyer is that if we had disciplinary authority, like Cleveland, it might well contravene the IPA as it now, or the collective bargaining agreement as it exists. Lacking that power, the fact that we might independently make a recommendation based on an independent investigation to the administration before there is a decision by the chief, I don't think violates the agreement in the slightest, because the disciplinary power, what the rights of the officers under the agreement wouldn't be affected at all. So that's my view as a lawyer. I will listen to what the law department has to say, but they are our lawyer. They do not make our decision. That's my view, for what it's worth.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon. Is that the end of your report?
It is. So I don't think we need a motion. We'll proceed. Yeah, it is, and we'll try to have that back here next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, moving on.
Okay, I just wanted to respond real quick I personally, I think, it's a level of disrespect.
But Ms. Haskell, he answered the question,
Well,
so we're
hold
gonna
on a
move
second.
on.
I just want to
But Ms.
say, I'm not
Haskell,
against it.
But we're gonna, okay, and so if we're not against it, we're gonna move forward. They're gonna come up with a proposal. He stated and answered your question from a standpoint of not feeling that it's a disrespect to him, but it's about us and our powers as a board and how we interpret them, okay? So we're gonna move forward with our Human Resources Subcommittee. Ms. Richards?
I have to start with an apology. My goal was to have a packet available for you guys tonight because we met. My father died last week, and so that all got shoved back. I do wonder if my subcommittee, we could meet just briefly afterwards to come up with a date and time to meet, and then the goal would be to be able to have a full report next week.
Thank you, Ms. Richards.
Mr. Chair, are we able to meet via Zoom? And Mr. Gibbon?
No. Not at this point.
Subcommittees?
Not at this point. Because the problem is sunshine. You know, if in theory, what we would have to do is give a notice that would include the Zoom link.
Is that possible?
Yeah, it is possible, yeah.
I think the concern was the capacity of guests that your
Yeah.
Zoom link can hold, because there is that max capacity, so I think that was part of the,
What is, do we know what that is?
I don't know that exact number.
We meet with, we meet them on Friday. So we'll meet with them on Friday, and we can ask that question. And you're talking about a Zoom meeting for your subcommittee? How many's on the subcommittee? 3, Ms. Richards?
And, Mr. Chairman, Ms.
Yes.
Reed, thinking about it, just thinking about it further,
There's not
I
a
think the
quorum.
problem may be public access. Not everybody has Zoom. I'd be uncomfortable with it. I really would. I wouldn't do it until we're absolutely certain that it's okay.
All right, so we'll check that information out this Friday when we meet with them. Thank you, Ms. Richards. Ms. Lewis, Community Engagement.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Again, I'm sorry, this is just off the top of my head, because I know we want to try to facilitate it. One approach might be that that the notice has a physical location, which might be that, you know, the chair's, I don't know about house, but, you know, some location at which the chair will be present, and will have a computer that is linked, that has the Zoom link, and a big enough screen so that a member of the public could go to that location and participate through the Zoom link that the chair would have. That might be one approach, but I think it really needs to be worked through.
The only reason I ask is just for this particular first meeting, because I think a lot of the subcommittees are meeting on Wednesdays. It's just becoming more difficult to arrange for times where everyone could be a part of the committee. So that's why I brought that up.
All right, moving on to Ms. Lewis and our Community Engagement Subcommittee report.
So, our meetings are going to focus essentially on hearing from the people. And I had used the word stakeholders, and I want to make sure when I use the word stakeholders that everybody knows I'm talking about the community. And so the community in general. But I want to talk, if I could, about where we're meeting and the logistics of that. So on last week, Ms. Jackson, one of the persons during the public comment, had mentioned about feeling a sense of comfort and safety. And so we chose the public library as the meeting place. And some of the things that we plan on doing are meet and greets and lunch and learn and speaker series. And the objective of initially the meet and greet is just that. We want to be able to meet the public, hear from them, and they hear from us. But we want to center too around the idea of creating our own footprint. And so with that, we're talking about using our, I should say, adapting our own website and our own logo, that kind of thing. So that's still in the work. It's in its infancy, but also really helping the public understand how to go about registering their complaint in the complaint process and what that looks like. And so when we get together those first initial meetings, that's what we'll be doing. You know, hearing from the people, getting a sense of what they think is important, because I think the idea is that they're not feeling that they're being heard. So we want to make sure we provide an atmosphere where they can feel heard. And so that's pretty much where we are. Once again, one of the things we want to do after we do that is connect with other stakeholders, nonprofits, churches, NAACP, neighborhood coalitions and corps, agencies, Urban League. And so that's what we see ourselves going forward with that.
Also, Ms. Richards, I think it may be important as we look at these, kind of where we're going to be when the governance subcommittee produces them for them. I think something that possibly would fall under community engagement as well, when we talk about the complaints of our citizens, is some research and analysis, researching some of those complaints from a standpoint of the frequency of maybe the same complaint, possibly against certain officers, and also analyzing the longevity of how long those complaints turn around as far as the time. I feel like being able to deliver that information back to the community is going to be important, so that from a standpoint of building some trust and some bridges, not only with us as a board, but also with the subcommittee. So I like what you were saying, because what I was hearing was almost like research. You know, what's some of the research that goes in as we teach people the proper way to make a complaint, researching how long is that complaint being touched by a police officer, and is there any follow-up before the 30 days from the police department, but also them notifying us of that as well, as our community engagement subcommittee. So that way we have that knowledge, versus just saying that, hey, yeah, we followed up with them. Man, I think it would be beneficial for a notification to come to our subcommittee as well, that you are aware and your committee's aware that there's been a touch point from that complaint.
Now, I don't think, according to our auditor, that there is a follow-up before that 30-day process, if I heard him correctly. But that doesn't mean that we can't do that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I think we created some kind of a card or something like that to be able to do that.
Yep. And I think, I just feel some of the research and analysis from your subcommittee is going to help us and help our community as well. Thank you.
And then two just quick points with regards to community engagement. Someone made, in another group that I serve with, someone brought forth an excellent idea. I know last week we were talking about perhaps participating in ward meetings, but I would encourage you, as a thought, is to perhaps work with church leaders and church groups to see if there's any opportunities that you could collaborate with weekly Bible studies, to where the community engagement comes in to be a part of the Bible study of that particular church, and just gets a moment to present and bring forward information. And the second part is they're under the budget, and this will kind of, I guess, lead into the budget report as well too. There's about $40,000 that was allocated specifically for education. And so I think that education fits most squarely with community engagement, and I see that from a standpoint of us educating the community and us undertaking the expense to ensure that we're creating an environment to where we can do that. And whether that's, providing food or providing a setting that's accommodating for us to bringing forth like genuine connections, then I think that's incredibly appropriate. And I would encourage you to, I guess, just be thoughtful, in terms of how you can best create experiences and environments to where you can bring out as many community folks to garner as much substantive input as possible.
Thank you.
Ms. Lewis, I would encourage you to get Mr. Costa's cell phone, because he is the chair of our budget and finance. So whatever checks that you need, he can write them.
I have his number on speed dial.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Costa. Is that the conclusion of your report out?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so
Budget and finance, Mr. Costa, go ahead. I'm
yep,
sorry.
happy to. So two major items. One, I want to discuss roles and functions, and then two, I'd like to also just provide an update on our meeting that we had earlier today. I went ahead and prepared almost like just a draft of how I see this committee operating. I'm a fan. I can either distribute it electronically for everybody's review, or I could just read it out loud, but I tried to keep it relatively short. So I'll open it to you all in terms of what you prefer.
I'll take it both hands.
Okay. Okay. So I'll read this out loud, and then if there's any thoughts or whatever, you can, and then I will distribute after our meeting as well too, for us to approve if we need to. And I did send out the budget to everyone following our meeting last Wednesday, and so please let me know if you didn't receive that. So The Budget and Finance Subcommittee will preside over matters related to the Citizens Police Oversight Board's budget, including 1, management, supervision, and administration of Citizens Police Oversight Board budget, 2, preparation of financial reports, and provision of recommendations to the Citizens Police Oversight Board for the approval and authorization of expenditures, 3, holding public hearings on the budget for public insight, and 4, oversee the financial performance of Citizens Police Oversight Board and monitor the standards and best practices to implement and update the spending and resource allocation plan. So that's broadly what I see the functions of the Budget and Finance Committee. If there's anything that you didn't hear or you think needs to be added in there, please do let me know, and I'll distribute this electronically after our meeting as well too, so people can put some eyes on it. But I wanted to just, I guess, bring forward that to everyone's attention and consideration.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Costa, the word preside caught my ear, and I don't know that I understand it in this context, and maybe to the extent that it, well, could you explain what you mean by preside?
Just to oversee the matters or to govern the matters relating to the budget.
Okay, the problem I may have with it is maybe the operational parts of it. You know, and I think we need to, and to some extent, I know you're going to talk a little bit more about our conversation with the finance folks, but the actual administration of the financial functions of the board, I think, may or may not properly fall to one committee to actually carry out, and that's where I think we may need some thought. So that's just my take on it.
So what I'm hearing is scale back to
It may be more the you know, the monitoring, the proposing, may be the it certainly would be the main liaison with the finance department and so on, but it may be that, you know, that, you know, I'm sure you're again talking about who's actually going to take the actions to spend money. That one I think needs some thought, and it may or may not be that that's something that can or should be delegated to a committee or committee chair. That's my caution.
Well, I think that's well said, Mr. Gibbon. I think that what we can do as you continue to flesh this out, Mr. Costa, what we can do to safeguard, I think, the subcommittee, yourself as chair, but also us as a board, is, let's just say, when it comes to having to, and what we're choosing and how we're choosing to allocate some of the spending, that still comes back to us as a board for a vote of how we want to do some of those things, along with Mr. Costa meeting with the finance of the city to see how we can reallocate some of those fundings. I know when we met with them, because right now we don't have a deputy nor an admin, those funds are still there, and if we have to reallocate those funds in some type of way, that's something that we can have a discussion about and a vote about as we move forward. But I do think, to your point, it is a both and, so our Budget and Finance Committee should be communicating with our HR subcommittee from a standpoint of pay, when we want to interview a deputy, independent auditor, and also an admin. So they're always going to be talking to see, hey, to make sure those funds that we've allocated, that those funds are there and that we have them and where they need to be going.
Okay, no, I appreciate the insight. I will scale back and make it more specific to where it's clear that those decisions aren't clearly coming from the Budget and Finance Committee, but rather it's more so from a recommendation and a monitoring standpoint to bring forward for board consideration and approval.
Yeah, I think that would be the safer way, but we've still got these issues about that we heard about this afternoon about who's actually going to send the vouchers to the, you know, to be paid. That's the whole issue. Yeah. But I think a more general function for the committee now would be better.
Okay, that's part 2 of the report I'm going to get into. Okay, so earlier we met today with the we met with, Steve Fricker and Michael Wheeler, who oversee the internal budget and finance process with the city. And it was largely for us to gather information with respect to how the budget allocation process works with respect to this board. And so I think there's a couple of items that we need to prioritize in terms of things that we need to act on, as well as there are just a couple of pieces of general information that we want to bring to everybody's attention in respect so we all understand the budget and finance process. I think, as Bob alluded to, one of the top priority items that we need to figure out is the authorization process within Workday. So Workday is the system that the city utilizes in order to oversee pay, HR, administrations, but also the authorization of expenditures. And so, you know, somebody will within the system will apply for an item to be spent. And that will then generate some type of notification that requires an authorization from a higher up individual in order to approve that expenditure. And so while we're not, you know, spending a number of things right now, it's going to come up to where we do need to spend. So we need to create those authorizations within Workday in order for us to process. The idea that was proposed to us was perhaps that we have an administrative assistant who, once that person is hired, that they have the ability or the capacity to make an order within Workday, and then that request be approved by someone higher up, whether that be the chair of this committee or whether that be the auditor themselves, as the supervisor to the deputy and the administrative assistant. Regardless who oversees the authorities, it's something that we need to get in place in order for us to effectively process expenditures. So I want to bring that to y'all's opinion as the first thing. Second, we need to have a conversation with respect to the costs and the expenses for labor. We've not been really spending down, especially the fact that we don't have a deputy auditor right now, as well as an administrative assistant that we're going to be losing. And it seems like the board is going to be stepping up to carry on a good deal of the work. And the initial allocation, which was about $10,800 for board members total, is going to fall short of the work that we're going to be putting in. So I think we all need to have a conversation with respect to how do we adjust for that? Will there be additional compensation for board member time that goes beyond what we kind of all expected originally? And how do we pair that conversation with the understanding that this role is largely volunteer and there's a lot of it that, you know, we just won't be compensated for? And in considering that as well too, we do have the ability to bring on contracted service if we come to the conclusion and we feel that we're not going to be able to bring on an administrative assistant or a deputy auditor in a timely fashion to where it can actually help us to be effective. And so we do have that ability to bring on
council. I think we need council approval from that, he said.
For if the allocation is over $50,000, then yes, we'll need council approval.
If it's over 50,000, then it needs council approval. Anything under 50,000, we don't need council approval.
I heard him saying for independent contractors, it needs council approval. Okay.
For under 50K?
For under 50K, but there is an internal check for anything that's for independent contracts that are over 15,000, but that's an internal person who oversees that. And so that's just something for us to consider. You know, if it's seeming like we can't get work done because we aren't able to actually get folks hired in because of the administrative barriers, then do we want to put together a contract for somebody to come in and help us out? I don't want to make any recommendations one way or another. I think that it's hard to say that without knowing who's applied or what the applicant pool is looking like. But you know, I would hate for us to go another 2 months without us having somebody else. And from a financial responsibility standpoint, you know, I think it'd be more prudent for us to spend the dollars that we've got allocated for staff rather than for us saying, let's compensate ourselves additionally. I'm not a fan of saying, let's pay ourselves more, honestly. because of just the nature of this role that we're in.
Mr. Costa, did, on that, you know, just to follow up with the paying ourselves thing, were you guys able to find out anything about when and or how we get paid? Because I was speaking with someone yesterday, and I was told that we won't be putting our own time in. I think Caitlin's supposed to pass around a sheet every week for us, an attendance sheet. Did you guys talk about anything?
And we didn't discuss any HR functions. It was
Okay.
more so specific to the budget.
Okay. All
We
right.
do know that Kurt, for now, to my knowledge, is responsible for entering our time into the work. Thank you.
Work.
But no, we did not discuss that. But Mr. Costa, I was going to ask, because you asked a couple of questions inside of your report. So I wanted to see if we could just kind of do a line item for your first question that you presented to them, if that's okay with everyone else.
All right, I'm going to go back. The first item that I brought up was with respect to the internal authorizations within Workday. I want to welcome our HR and employment subcommittee's input, because I think that the more that we work together in terms of like what type of authorizations may be needed for employees internally, that they can then inform each other, and so that we're creating like systems and checks that are not overly like cumbersome and that are not like making it hard to operate, but that are sensible and are going to create checks to make sure that like we're not spending like willy-nilly. Because at the end of the day, this is taxpayer dollars, and so we gotta be good stewards with those dollars.
Yeah, I definitely see us working hand in hand with all that. I feel like, again, a little bit of a cart before the horse type thing. We haven't even defined our committee at this point. This is your first shot at defining yours. I don't know if the others have defined their committee or put that in writing. Like, we got this committee, no one knows exactly what the point is or what it does or why it does it, and I really would be more comfortable if, unless there's a decision that we need to make at this moment for some reason, I would really love to get the context of what we're all doing and approved. You know, maybe we don't want you to do all that kind of stuff, or maybe you're overlapping at another committee. I just think I would really like to have some structure in our committees and who's doing what, and when they, you know, the overlap.
Oh, of course. And no, there's nothing that needs a decision
Okay.
right now. And I'm incredibly sensitive to everything that has transpired for you in the last week. And again, like we're all operating with each other on a human level, and so like there's got to be like compassion that goes into what we're doing. So no, I was not looking forward to any type of.
If I may, to that point, you had asked a question several talks ago about, because you weren't here, about the Human Resource Committee getting together, and then you were interrupted by someone and weren't able to finish your point. Can you finish your point, please?
My only point was that if we could just briefly meet after this meeting
Okay.
to discuss when we
Okay.
get together.
Okay.
But my bigger point just now is if you've made your committee descriptions, basically, I missed them. I don't know if they've been made or not, but I think it's really important for us, again, as a board, to say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. How are we going to advertise, come to our committee, if we don't even have a definition of what the committee does?
Ms. Richards, governance did, last week when you had to be out, and I'm sorry, we knew it was a family member, but did not realize it was your father, I'm sorry. The governance functions were actually approved last week. I think you probably somewhere in your email.
I apologize for that. Thank you.
I think we're still waiting for the purposes for our other subcommittees. So community engagement. Mr. Costa just submitted his budget and finance. So yeah, and so we can. You want to move? We want to take a motion.
I'd like to circle back next week to. I want to actually circulate the language so everyone has
Table
it
it.
first. Let's table it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, did we not get a purpose from the community
about to say that. You weren't here last week, but we said that within the city context, the community engagement provides a process that gives community members, more specific stakeholders in the neighborhood/community, the chance to influence the administration, decision-making, and the Citizens Police Oversight Board development.
So was that a draft? Because we never motioned it to be accepted.
That was a draft.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a draft.
So,
Go ahead.
no, I'm just saying we need to motion it to bring it into land. We need to make a motion.
Someone can make a motion.
Does everybody have a copy of it?
A copy of what? What I just read?
Yes.
I have one, and I am assuming that the subcommittee, I sent them copies, yes. I don't think you have one, though.
Would you mind sending that to the rest of the board, and we can table it, and we can look over and read and come back and motion it
Because we
next
probably
week?
need to make it a little bit more seamless.
Okay. We can table it to next week. That's not a problem.
And if I could, I just wanted to bring two more pieces of information to
Please.
everybody as it relates to the Budget and Finance Committee. In the fall, the administration will start looking to next year's budget for the allocation process. That budget allocation process is kind of a hybrid of them looking to see what was funded last year, while at the same time also giving consideration to whatever budget changes or appropriations they may have been. An incredibly important item to note is that whatever we don't spend that's been allocated, we will lose.
Yep.
And so, and does not carry forward in the following year. So that is not to say that we need to like spend, but let's, I just want to make sure we're being as effective as possible with the dollars that have been allocated to bring forward the work that we've been charged with.
The one point bearing on that, though, that was a helpful thing, that if we encumber money within this year, even though it's to be actually spent in the following year, that's permissible, and we may well be wanting to be looking at encumbrances as we get towards the end of the year.
Yeah, so if we took on a contract and that we committed to oversee that will stretch beyond the end of the year, then we can retain those funds.
Thank you for bringing that out. That was my question to you, that if we don't spend what's allocated for this year, will we lose it for next year? And that was going to be my question for you. Yep, that's the way this usually works in situations like such as ours.
Anything else to report, Mr. Costa?
Thanks for everybody's time earlier at the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Want to go back before we get into new business. Ms. Lewis, I know that Brandy Davis over at the Urban League, they have the young adults who did a report out for the DOJ concerning some of the 4 areas that they were concerned about. I know that she would love to get, and for her young adults to get information on our community engagement subcommittee and any type of listening that we're doing. I think that she would welcome you and your subcommittee into that space with their young adults. Because I know one of their, if you will, platforms that they're discussing is police involvement and community policing.
That'd be great. We'll make sure we send out an announcement to them. They come.
Yep. I'll make sure I send you her contact information too.
Thank you.
All right, moving forward on to item 6 on our agenda, new business. The first item, communication plan. Just want to give everybody an update. To myself, Ms. Castle, and Mr. Costa, we will be meeting with the city on Friday to talk about possible web pages for our board. Do we want an addition to where we're added onto the city website, or do we want to start the process of creating something ourselves? So we're going to be talking about that on Friday, and we'll come back with a report to you based on what we learn from this process as far as our communication plan moving forward, so that everybody can log on, see all of our meetings, but also our subcommittee meetings as well, and also location. And this, Ms. Lewis, may be where we can post the process, if you will, of our complaints, and see how that looks moving forward. So we'll give you a report out of that meeting next week.
What time will you be meeting Friday?
1 o'clock.
Where?
Is that going to be Zoom? Yeah, it's on Zoom, I believe.
Are we all invited to that?
Yeah, if you want to come.
Would you mind just sending out the Zoom link to us so we can all have access to log in?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll send it out once we receive it. Absolutely.
Wait, sorry. Let's reverse. Sorry.
We don't need to reverse. I'm just wondering I just want to make sure that we're meeting our responsibility to ensuring that our meetings are open, or.
Oh, this is.
Are we just gathering information?
Yeah, we're just gathering
or-
information.
okay.
Yeah, we're not, we ain't making any decisions.
Can I make a suggestion, Mr. Chairman? Keep it to the three of you, and maybe one more. Don't have a board majority for it. Just, there's no reason to raise the issue.
Yeah, we're not making any decisions. We're just, it's
It's
fact
not,
finding.
it's not a committee, and it's not a majority of the board.
All right. Got it. All right. Next, IT training, I think you put this on, Ms. Aniskevich.
Yes, I just wanted to ask everyone I mean, we still have to do this Teams training. Do you guys think that's important or not? Or maybe insert that training in where Phil, may not be able to do what he was going to do, maybe substitute the training that Phil Young was going to do with an IT training.
How long is this training?
I don't think it's that long, and I don't think it's going to take like 2 weeks or anything. I just want them to come in maybe at the beginning of one of our board meetings or at the end and just show all of us at one time. That's what they prefer. The IT department prefers to just do all of us at one time so that we don't keep calling them every day saying, well, can you do me today? Can you do me today? And I just thought it would make more sense for them to come in during one of our board meetings. The same way they did when we first set everything up, when we first set up our computers. They would do it that very same way. When we first set up our computers, they would do it that way and just show us how to go in on Teams. And then that way we have that as another resource of communication and documentation of what we're doing.
I think it worked well when they provided us windows of time that we could come in for like workday, and that with everyone's scheduling. I think the Teams training is important, but I don't think it's at the absolute top of the priority of things that we need to get done. So if there were some options to accommodate to people's varying schedules, maybe they give us 2 different times during the week or 3 different times for us to come, and if there's synergy towards one of the dates rather than the other, but you may be spinning your wheels trying to find a time that works for all of us.
That's why I was saying, do you want them to come in on one of our board meetings at the beginning, maybe 15 minutes before we start, and set it up for it, show us how to do it, like they did when we first started off, when they had us set up our laptops.
Personally, I wish that it could be kind of the window of time or optional, because I know some of us are familiar with Teams, so I don't know if everybody would need that training, and that's just my personal, I'm familiar with it, so I don't know if that has to be a board training.
So would you all then prefer to just individually contact IT and have them set you up?
What if, for whoever can make it, like, if they can come like 15, 20 minutes earlier prior to our meeting, then like that's fine.
Okay.
And then they still provide windows of opportunities to where people can come.
Okay, so do you want me to ask them if they can come to one of our meetings, and how do you want to do that?
So our next meeting is going to be at is what, next Wednesday at 6 o'clock?
Yeah,
So
so
you-
if they can come at what, 5?
So they could come at like 5:30 or 5:45, and whoever's able to make it a little earlier can, y'all's committee is meeting,
Yeah.
subcommittee meeting. Well, that's okay, because there's still windows
Yeah, it's fine.
of other times.
Yeah.
If y'all want to wrap, I don't know, I don't want to make this more difficult than it is.
Yeah. I would simply say, for those who want to be trained in Teams, email Ms. Aniskevich. She has set up a time for them outside of the meeting for that to happen. Okay? Is that all right?
It's fine with me. That's why I proposed the question. How do you all want to do it? If you want to make your individual appointments with them, if you feel you need them, Caitlin says she already is familiar with it, so she doesn't need the training. So maybe we should just set up our own individual appointments with IT. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, it would be nice, honestly, if they could just kind of give us an overview of what they want us to know. If they could send a quick email, because they just want us to get familiar with using Teams. That's something many of us are probably really familiar with, but if there's a specific function that we have to have as being a part of this board. So it'd be good if we could just kind of get a brief synopsis of exactly what they feel we would need or get from this training. That would help me to know whether I need to sign up or not.
Okay, so maybe I should just ask Darren to send out an email to all of us to tell us what Teams is, how to familiarize ourselves with it, and I don't know, go from there. I thought when I met with him about my cell phone, I thought he said that we needed to be trained on how to do it. So
Yeah, it's okay if you want to email him to set that up. That's fine. I kind of agree with Ms. Reed and Ms. Costa and Ms. Castle. I use Teams pretty frequently, but if there's an additional thing from a city perspective that we need to know, that's what I think that email to him can ask that question.
all right, I'll find out from him, if he thinks we need to know anything that's specific to how to use it based on the city and being part of this board being part of the city function, so.
All right, next, C, it says community involvement in subcommittees. I think we covered that. Okay. And last, item D is proposed new subcommittees. This was brought on by Ms. Anaskevich.
Yeah, you can say vice chair. We call you chair, you can call me vice chair.
Vice
Appreciate
Chair
it.
Anaskevich.
Thank you.
My apologies.
Because we don't know what's going to happen again with our auditor, I'm wondering if we need to create a citizens review complaint subcommittee, but it sounded like you're already giving that task to the community engagement from what was said earlier. I don't know, maybe I misheard, but I'm just wondering, do we need to create a subcommittee strictly and only for accepting complaints from citizens? Strictly and only complaints from citizens, especially while right now, we don't have an auditor that's available to us. We do not have a deputy auditor. Our administrative assistant is leaving tomorrow. We are up a creek without a paddle right now as far as complaints are concerned.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Lewis, based on our committee meeting today, I'm so sorry, I'm very tired today. That's every day. As it concerns some of the things that we discussed at the committee meeting, is that something that you wanted to allocate to the committee, is following up on complaints? Is that something that our committee is looking to do based on the scope and breadth of filling in the gap for Mr. Young's absence?
Seems to me, I just heard last week from the public comment that seemed to rise up, and I'm not sure if that's something that the community engagement wants to address. I just saw it as something, to me, that community engagement would want to do, but I'm open to whatever the committee suggests. So if we think we need a separate subcommittee to address that and that only, I'm open to that.
I'd be concerned, like I think we need to assume Mr. Young or someone will be in his position, and I don't want to make confusion for the community about where to file their complaints. So I would just want to make sure that the complaints all get filed the same way, and then if we need to intervene somehow, Is that what you're saying? We get a subcommittee
we-
to intervene in his absence?
Yes, we
Is
have
that
to have a
what you're-
backup plan because the
Okay.
complaints are not going to stop coming in. And we need a plan B, especially if he doesn't get better soon. And I'm in close communication with him because so he can tell me, okay, today I got this complaint. Can you call this person? You know, the complaints aren't going to stop, but do we need, my question to the board is, do we need a subcommittee to follow up on just the police complaints only, nothing else, no library meetings with the citizens, nothing like that, just complaints. Just complaints. Do we need a subcommittee for that, especially since we do not know what's going to happen with our auditor?
So would the auditor, in his absence, obviously, he would have someone to take complaints, isn't that right?
That's a concern. We don't have a backup plan. Every complaint, to my knowledge, and please anyone step in and correct me if I'm wrong, it goes directly and only to Mr. Young.
That's correct. It goes directly and only to him. So in his absence, is there someone who would be in his stead that would operate in that capacity?
No, there's not another person. So the complaints not only go to Mr. Young, but they also go to Officer Beck.
Yes, and so
In the police
is he going to
department.
be acting in Mr. Young's stead in light of the fact?
No.
Well,
Maybe-
no,
well, we don't know that. That's what I'm
Mr.
asking.
Young's an independent police auditor.
Exactly,
And so they're not going to do what Mr. Young would do.
Okay.
exactly.
But they're going to get the complaint, so they would have it. And so, yeah, to answer that question.
And we know he doesn't have an assistant, and nor does he have an administrative assistant.
Yeah, he doesn't have a
Well,
bench.
and so
It's just him.
Where are we with that?
I can answer that.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, even as late as this morning, Ms. Lewis, he was taking complaints on his cell phone from his hospital bed.
That wasn't the question that she asked.
I'm sorry.
What, you're asking the question of, is there anybody, whether it's an admin that we have that we're ready to put in that position? Is that the question you're asking?
Yeah, where are we with that?
Yeah.
I'm going to actually defer this to Mr. Costa.
It's HR could answer?
Well,
Oh, I can answer it.
Wait a minute.
I can answer it. So when he mentioned contracts, that would be our fastest way of getting someone in to address the concerns about handling some of the issues that we just discussed. Again, if we go through the civilian pool, which is, and this is just to get an admin too, correct, through the civilians. So that would be to get an admin too. We have two options. We can go through a contract under $50,000. Based on working with our HR committee, we could begin to put out we could solicit people to put in an application as soon as tomorrow, if we go the contract route. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Reed, let me just say something. So Stacy Doty, who works for the city, who's the city HR person, they have a stack of applications.
That's what
of
she said
people.
last week.
Yes, so they have people, so that's kind of where we are. So that's something that we need to sift through from a committee. Maybe that's the HR committee's process of sifting through a possible candidate. And so I believe she said there is an admin 2 and an admin 3, and they both do 2 different things. I think an admin 3 is a little bit more of a, I don't want to say that they're better, but I think that's a higher grade of admin. So I think that what we need to do is, Ms. Richards, from an HR subcommittee, if we can touch base with Ms. Doty to get a hold of some of those applicants to see, based on your subcommittee, and based on the job description, where they fit and where we can stand at.
That turnaround could be 2 weeks, by the way. According to Mr. Fricker, we could get from the civilian pool of applicants, they would be able to start in 2 weeks for an admin 2 position. Is that correct, Mr. Gibbon?
That's what I heard too, but also for admin 3, and I think for some of the reasons that Mr. Boyd is saying, that the higher skill set is probably what we're going to need. We're probably going to be stretching even in admin 3 to do this. For what it's worth, what we were told this afternoon, an admin 2 likely is a member of the bargaining unit, and admin 3 is not, which, I certainly believe in the city unions, but it may give us more flexibility with an admin 3, which may be the better way to go. If Mr. Chairman, if I could go on a little further.
Before you go further, if that's the bargaining thing, how, even if they're hired under contract, they would?
No, this is if it's a civil service hire as a city employee off the list.
Okay, I thought we were talking about hiring someone under contract.
That's an alternative, but it may be faster to hire from the list.
And then how would that person get trained? How would that person get trained?
So I think if we go from the civilian pool, I would imagine there is already some sort of training there. Is that correct?
Beg pardon?
So if we were to draw from the civilian pool for admin 2 or admin 3, we can anticipate that there's already a training there for those.
Well, they will have received, if they're existing city employees, they've probably already received some basic training. We're going to have a problem either way to go if Mr. Young isn't, if he's not available, whether we get a contractor, whether we get civil servant, we're going to have a problem getting the job done. Mr. Chairman, the other thing I guess I would ask, and just on this broad topic, it's kind of been alluded to with the suggestion of a subcommittee. And whether it's a subcommittee or not, I guess the real question is whether any of us are willing to essentially, on a, just a volunteer ad hoc basis, staff up that office, while Mr. Young is out. I have no particular problem, with that, or even doing some of it. I suppose some of us have a little bit more background for it than others.
I don't have a problem.
But is that the question, is whether we should be indeed figuring out who might step up and spend some time processing complaints, or at least getting them forwarded?
I think that if there were a potential for some kind of legalese or a question that needed to be answered, I believe that Mr. Gibbons would be the one to help facilitate that taking of the complaints and answering any questions. So I am proposing that Mr. Gibbons be the one to do that.
Well,
if he's willing. I know he's able.
I'm willing to be part of hopefully a team, if you want to call it that, if there are others of us who would be willing to step up, and hopefully would only be a very temporary thing. I do not have the time to take over that function myself entirely. I mean, I'm willing to even come down to the office and do some paperwork, but I do work full time.
I'll do it. I mean, look, as I've said before, I just retired as a federal investigator. I will do it. Because if you all remember from last week, I believe it was mentioned, I'm not sure if it was Deputy Chief Harding or Mr. Young, how some complaints are frivolous. Some of them are ongoing by the same people that are basically frivolous. We learned tonight that those complaints that we're supposed to be looking at use of force, deadly force, and that type of thing, real serious complaints. Not to say that everyone's complaint isn't important, because it's important to them, to the person who's making the complaint. But I think that I would be able to discern enough to maybe, I could talk to someone and say, well, do you think, I could just investigate the complaint more, so that we're not just because somebody says, I'm mad at the police because they did this or that, it doesn't mean it's a valid complaint, is what I'm trying to say.
I got Mr. Costa, Ms. Lewis, and then Ms. Castle.
Okay.
It may be easier to, I guess, just adopt some language that gives the chair authority to appoint individuals of the board to oversee complaint processes in the absence of a police auditor. But I think we need to consider seriously, like, maybe putting out an RFP for and soliciting proposals for individuals like to bring on a contractual basis to assist the board with some of this work. And I know there's concern about training and this, that, and the third, but I think at the end of the day, we just need some hands, so some folks who have the time, who have the interest, and who have the passion, and are willing to do the work and willing to help us build and steer this in the process. And if the city's function of getting and delivering individuals to us in a timely fashion isn't going to work out, then I'm a big fan of us putting something out there for folks on a contractual basis so we can bring on some people. I've got concerns about us taking on the role of being the investigators, especially when we're making decisions from a then non-independent standpoint as it moves its way up. So I think, one, it's important for us to create, I guess, just a pathway for us to step in and to take on investigations if we need to. But I guess, two, why not us consider ratcheting it up and us going out and finding somebody if the process of the city finding somebody is not actually working? Or a series of people. Our flexibility under our contracts can be as we see them fit, and our ability to negotiate with somebody. And we do have the money. We got a lot of money, and we got a lot of work to do. So let's do it.
Just to clarify, I wasn't saying I would be the investigator.
I love that idea, Mr. Costa. I mean, we have the funds right now to do it. This is a creative solution to something that we didn't know we'd be faced with right now. So I really like that thinking. I also think, as we're thinking about this, I don't think we need to focus right now necessarily on the investigative part, but I think it's making sure that the community still has contact to somebody who can move this work forward and get them connected. So I don't think we need to get hung up on that investigative part. I would just like for us to identify what that system is to make sure that those complaints are still heard and then moving forward with the process.
And once again, I started my report with saying that people wanted to feel heard. They wanted to feel heard. So we want to make sure that we are creating an atmosphere that that's happening. And so, to your point, Mr. Costa, I believe we need to go forward with that.
I have a practical question. Is the city, did they start actually looking for those employees, or is the stack of people just sitting there waiting for us to do something with them? Do you know?
No, go ahead, Ms.
For admin 2 and admin 3 positions, they are just sitting waiting for us to pick their resumes and interview them.
So maybe if we make a call tomorrow and say, hand us the applicants, we can start setting up
Bingo.
Yes.
stuff right away. So, all right. So it's probably going to be about the same amount of time. You know, we do an RFP, we get it public, we do interviews, we do all that kind of stuff. We may be looking at a very similar time frame. If I get a stack of, or the committee gets a stack of applicants tomorrow, we start calling and setting up interviews. Maybe it is 2 weeks, but it's probably going to be at least 2 weeks for a contract person as well, I would guess. Maybe a double track. Maybe we do both.
That's true. Well, but that's just the bare minimums of getting an administrative assistant, and not even considering the fact of a deputy auditor, which we don't have as well too. And I don't think they need to necessarily be mutually exclusive. Maybe we find an RFP for an individual who comes in, they like the opportunity, or maybe we look to one of the applicants and we say, hey, it's going to take a long time to onboard you. Are you willing to come on a contractual basis for a short-term period while we onboard you? I'm incredibly open, I think, to the approach and the parameters of something, but like, we just need people. And so, you know, maybe we do both. Maybe we start going through the applications and calling people ASAP, but
Can I clarify something, please? I was not saying that I would investigate the complaints. I said, having been an investigator, I know how to deal with talking with people who have complaints. That's all I was trying to say. I wasn't saying I was going to investigate the complaint.
Thank you for the clarity, Ms. Aniskevich, and I appreciate you stepping in the role to, first of all, communicate with Mr. Young, and also communicating with some of the citizens out there, because I think it's doing exactly what you're saying, Ms. Lewis, is that our citizens are still being heard by somebody, which is important, so we need to keep that going. My suggestion would be, could you, I think between both of our chairs, one from our HR and the other from our Budget and Finance, can we start to contact the city tomorrow as far as those applicants, so we can start looking into this? And if you and Mr. Costa can be kind of joint in communication with one another, kind of like how the process is looking and where we are, I think that would be important, because if we do need to look at an alternate route, I think Mr. Costa has some understanding of what that should look like as well. But I know that there are some people right now that it's just waiting for us to check their information.
Mr. Chair, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to say, is it possible, is there someone we can contact in the city, you know, in city administration, who will help with training of, if we do an RFP, would they train that person, or are they going to require them to go under civil service?
No, they'd be. So the training under administrative functions are those that are specific to the way that the city operates. And so if we bring on an independent contractor, they're going to be independent from those functions. There may be some degree of exposure from like Teams or whatever equipment or software, but I think that the training would come from what we put together and their exposure with Phil. And really what we tell them, this is what we need, and we're paying you to do this job, and this is what we need you to do.
And really quickly, I still have some concerns because, again, the only way a person can file a complaint is by calling Mr. Young's phone. And it's that, well, we know about Mr. Beck, Officer Beck, excuse me. So the channel, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, several ways, email and phone call, and there's a third option, mailing.
But it's incorrect. So maybe not so much the portals as it is to where it gets funneled to. So my concern is if it all essentially goes to Mr. Young and only Mr. Beck, is there a way that we can intercept that process just in case? And I think this is where Vice Chair was headed. We kind of need a backup for Mr. Young in the interim immediately, just because every complaint only goes to him.
Right, and relying on Mr. Beck, I don't think that that's a smart decision, because he's an active officer, is that correct? Okay, so, you know, it's kind of an insult to any citizen who has a complaint to have them to complain directly to someone like him when there's a review board now in place. I think it should be able to come to us first. And then that's the process. I believe Mr. Young, it goes to him, and then he does whatever he has to do with it before it goes to Mr. Beck. I believe that's how it works.
If there's no more discussion, I maybe like to bring forward a motion, and a motion that that in the absence of an independent auditor, deputy auditor, or administrative assistant, that the board chair be able to appoint members of the board and over to fill and oversee the functions of overseeing complaints in the interim period.
Mr. Costa, if I could just add to that before, because my concern is it would still exist. It's odd that this would happen, but I still believe that it would be prudent for our chair or vice chair or an appointee to have access to that information. I just think at least one other board person should be able to access the email or get into be able to receive the mail. We just need, to me, an additional source on the board that has access to the voicemail that they might leave. It's just really concerning, especially because we're crippled right now. We need to make sure that we have the process in place for access.
Is that what you intended, Mr. Costa?
Yeah, that's what I intended.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
And I second the motion, and the chair. I think I can probably plan on who the top volunteer is going to be here. And, you know, for what it's worth, I mean, I'm happy to help out, as I said. I just don't, I'm not in a position to take any sort of lead. So, I mean, I'd be a resource as well if that's wanted. But I think that's the right approach, so that's why I'm seconding it.
My apologies, I misunderstood. I just wanted it to be in place kind of permanently, that there's a board member that has access to all of that.
Yeah, and just to clarify, we are in the position that we're in right now. I don't think that the complaint process is always going to have this pathway and is going to be restricted to, it only comes into the auditor. But I think it's working with the infrastructure that we have right now. And so, Caitlin, are you comfortable reading back the language? See if we're ready to move forward?
Yeah, so right now I have motion by Costa that in the absence of the independent police auditor, the deputy independent police auditor, the administrative assistant, the board chair will appoint board members to fill in these roles in their absence. Did I capture that correctly?
Limiting in with now that it names all three of those, maybe we just need to broaden that up in a way to where, because I don't know if there's ever going to be a situation where we don't have those three people, but maybe I don't want to create an unnecessary barrier for the chair to be able to make that. Does that make sense?
I guess I'm confused now.
So,
I thought we were just talking about just strictly someone to take the complaints in the absence of our auditor, someone to take the complaints and possibly filter those complaints to fill in, because we don't know, you know, what, just, that's what I thought it was. I didn't know it included those other,
So is it maybe more a conversation about what that system is in their absence? I think that's more the conversation. So is it something as simple as we know that Mr. Young is out, so how do we get an automatic response from his email? So when he gets an email, how is that redirected? Do we have a board email where those can be redirected? Hey, and when Mr. Young is out, here is who this will be forwarded to, or who you can reach out to. Is there going to be, do we need some sort of phone line where we can have that redirected as well? So I think right now it's just the communication in the system as opposed to needing to get too in the weeds. It's just my thought.
I mean, I understood it the way you said it, you know, basically fill in, okay? And only temporarily, not getting to the other question. And yeah, we're gonna, this is not gonna be easy to do, because we're gonna have to figure out how to, get his system to work so that we're actually able to field them. For what it's worth, I mean, I think plainly there's a function of forwarding. There's probably some function of logging in, so at least we've got the information about the complaint, so when somebody actually can begin to process it, it's there. And also, it's talking with the complainant, just to get some sense that, yeah, a live human being hears you, uncritically. Can I just take 1 minute?
if I may,
So do we have a motion on the floor?
yeah,
Is there a second?
It was seconded by Mr. Gibbon.
Second by Mr. Gibbon. Any further discussion?
yeah, if I may, I think I'm poised to get a phone. I got an email from someone from the city today. If I can get a city cell phone, I can get a city cell phone, and then have email also set up on that city cell phone, then that might solve the problem because a lot of Mr. Young's complaints come through phone calls, okay? If I can get, this city telephone, I'm not gonna use my personal cell phone, and then that may solve the problem, and an email is set up, and that way I can have access to an email complaint and a phone call complaint in the interim, just in the interim until we figure out what's gonna happen and what we can do here. We can't just cut the public off and say, we're not taking any complaints.
I don't think anyone here was ever imagining that to be a possibility at all. I think we
No.
move forward with the emotion merely just to bring forth our ability to carry out those duties, if nothing else.
All right, any further discussion?
That's the same motion, right? You didn't rephrase it.
Same motion.
Good.
All right.
Just thinking out loud, The issue becomes, even if you get an issued cell phone, we'd have to disseminate the information to the public because they're still going to be calling Mr. Young's number. Right?
It should be able to be forwarded.
Should forward,
Yeah, they should, IT should be able to forward. Or they can call his number, and then he can have them call that number, the new number.
assuming he's able to.
I don't know.
I think we have to use this conversation as a motivation for us to get really aggressive on hiring, so this isn't an issue that continues.
I agree with that.
You ready to move the vote? Aniskevich?
Yes.
Gippin?
Yes.
Peoples? Lewis?
Yes.
Castle?
Yes.
Richards?
Yes.
Reed?
Yes.
Costa?
Yes.
Boyd? Yes.
Can I have a follow-up discussion about this? So my first committee meeting was going to be doing a description of our committee and then job descriptions. We don't even have a job description for a deputy director. We have Mr. Young's old job description. I'm not sure if we wanted to do that. And then we have the administrative 3 job position. So I'm going to call Ms. Doty tomorrow and say, give me your candidates for administrative 3. Do you want the 2 or 3 of the committees to interview these people? Bring like the top 3 candidates to this meeting? Which ones do you want the deputy director and the admin 3? How are we moving forward practically with this?
Well, I think, Ms. Richards, that's where we're going to take your leadership in that, as far as,
I'll make it. That's good.
yep, as leading the HR subcommittee. We'll take your discretion of how you want to go about and how you want to set up that procedure.
That's what I'm gonna echo, Mr. Chairman's. We need to set up our first meeting.
Right. So is everybody okay with, we set up our first meeting, our committee comes to an agreement, we do an email out about what the process is, what we're determining, and then if you disagree with the process of actually, and I'm just very narrowly talking about who we're looking to interview immediately, the admin 3 and maybe the deputy director,
Deputy
just the
Auditor.
admin 3?
I think that, like you say, until we've got a job description and everything else, I mean, that's going to be a very serious hire, because that may well be our auditor by the end of the year.
Right.
But yeah, I think we need to get staffed up, and I think that's exactly what you just said is what we need to do, get an admin 3 in place, and we'll worry about training and getting him going here. But yeah, that's going to be the fastest way by far.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Now, will that be under the RFP or civil service?
Both the admin 2 and 3 will be civil service.
Okay, so, I'm getting confused. Are the human resource, are we also looking at contractual? Are we working in tandem with the budget people? Okay,
Civil service pool is coming from the city of applicants who already have some minimal qualifications. And so the best way to expedite the process is our HR chair will contact Stacy Doty tomorrow, who is over HR for the city. She's going to request a pool of applications, and then she's going to sift through them with the committee, perhaps pick out our top 6 or so, and then we'll interview them, and hopefully we can have someone in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
okay, so that's in place, that's in replacement of a contractual person then?
No, that's going to be, that's just simply going to be the procedure that we're doing. And so we're not even talking about anybody contractual yet, unless there's something in this that we don't like, we interview all these people and it doesn't work, then that's when we start looking at RSP.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Clarifying that, thank you.
Anything else before we adjourn? That's all the items on our
I just
agenda.
have one question for, are you then gonna just send out an email?
No, she said that she was going to talk to y'all
Oh,
after.
afterwards, okay.
Mr.
I did
Chairman,
want to,
I don't know that you need to do it on the spot here, but pursuant to the motion that was adopted, you're going to have to reach out to members, maybe, and me, whatever, to do that function. And
Yeah, I will, but I don't want to do that now.
Yeah,
I got a couple of phone calls I want to make first. Yep, so I'll get some better understanding about something. And then I'll contact Ms. Anaskevich and possibly yourself as well. I think 2x2 is a good concept.
I wanted to put it before the board, and this is just something to think about, not necessarily even a proposal, but the idea that we move our meeting to a different location, and I wanted to suggest the main library. And I wanted to suggest that because it's a public library, number one, and number two, I think it makes for a more comfortable and convenient setting for the public. They have meeting rooms, and they have the ability to provide for us a podium. We can set the room up how we want to, and also audio. So mics, the whole 9 yards. So that's just something that we need to think about and maybe propose. So I want to put it before the board and see what they say.
Will we be able to
My
live
only
stream it?
concern with that would be the live stream function. So that's something we've heard repeatedly during public comment when we've been meeting with different members of the community, is that live stream is something that's very beneficial for accessibility. So I would just be curious if that is something that could be replicated in another setting.
Thank you, Caitlin. I agree. I think we have to consider the live stream issue if we move our meetings somewhere else. Right now, it's really easy. We just go up there and turn on a switch, and it's live stream.
Again, from a capacity standpoint, I think here is ideal for now, but I mean now in a very limited, short standpoint. I think until the time that we have the ability to, I guess, live stream or put out material under our own capacity, I think, yeah. But we've already had entities reach out and offer space for us too, and I think that that's 200% the intent and what we need to be doing, looking to not be here, but, and we were trying to do that at Kemp and I at a point, but it just, I don't think we're there just yet. I think we're maybe a month to like 2 months away from being positioned to like do that.
I agree. So that's just something for us to think about and work the logistics out, but,
Yep.
yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Anything else for the good of the order? Might like to make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
I said does anybody want to make a motion to
Oh,
adjourn?
I'm sorry.
Make a
I
motion.
make a motion that we adjourn.
I got a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Sounds unanimous.
Aye.
Have a good evening, everybody.